There are a lot of people who don't like the map Breeze, and many who think it should have been the map to rotate out instead of split. Maybe that's because of the longer range gunfights, maybe it's the longer rotation times when your teammate inevitably dies within the first few seconds of the round. Maybe it's that not many different agents are viable on the map Breeze. Or maybe it's that the gameplay can sometimes resemble a game of who sees who first. Either way, Breeze is clearly a map that people don't like. But how might we fix it? Well, to start, if you don't like Breeze because it's too big, unlucky. The main point of the map is to have a different size to the others. This creates different gameplay to other maps where maybe certain guns aren't as strong, whereas others can shine more. The same could be said for agents as well, and we've seen this recently appear with Sova versus Fade, where Fade has been eating into Sova's pick rate on many different maps, but because of the longer distances on Breeze, Sova is still seen as the clear superior choice by most. But the devs did try to fix Breeze once back in patch 4.0, and unlike the icebox changes, I would say that the changes to Breeze did have a positive impact. But I would say, had they just been a little bolder, Breeze could have ended up as a great Valorant map. And let me explain why. So let's talk about how to fix Breeze then. And I am not a map designer, so I am going to give some suggestions, but I have no idea if they're any good. Let me know in the comments what you think of some of these suggestions, but I'm sure that people will have some good solutions, even if you don't agree with mine. But I do think I know some of the problems with Breeze. And so let's talk about those problems, and we'll start with the A site. Now, I think this A site has potential to be the best site in all of Valorant, personally. I really like the kind of initial concept that the devs have come up with here for this A site. I think it's really, really good. But there is a bit of a problem with it. And they did try and fix this problem as well. This is one of the things that they did try and fix it when they changed Breeze, because entering through this A choke point here and just going as a 5-stack and getting down A with this Viper wall is very successful for the attackers, and it's very difficult to stop for the defenders. And that is one big problem, I think, with this map still, even though they did try and fix it. And I do appreciate the fact that you might remember this choke point was actually a bit wider, and this wall was actually like this, so you couldn't play close right because you could just be seen from here. So, you know, they did try and change this to allow for a close right defender and also making the choke point a bit smaller, and I appreciate that they did that. I think that was a nice attempt to try and fix this side of A. Unfortunately, I think it wasn't quite far enough to actually fix this problem, because this A site has 4 potential entry points for the attackers, and this is what I think makes it so interesting, you know, and there's potential there for some really interesting ideas to come out, but we don't see it enough, I don't think, because going down this A main choke point is just too easy, and going through the other ways is just not quite as easy, right? Because when you come up through mid here, right, you have to potentially look multiple ways. You know, coming through the doors can be quite a small choke point to go through. If you come through the big metal door, obviously that makes a big sound and the defenders know you're there. And coming and pushing all the way down here, well, the problem is crossing this is just a bit of a death trap, right? You can be seen by people here, anyone in spawn, right? It just is a bit too difficult, I think, to do consistently and find a lot of success from. Obviously, there's normally Sentinel utility here as well. So yeah, basically coming through these 3 ways isn't that easy, but coming through here is still pretty easy overall. You just have to clear close with something like a KO knife or a drone or a dog or whatever it is, right? And you clear close and you're probably pretty good, right? You just have to clear this corner and the 2 close ones, and then this Viper wall will see you ferried onto the site with the spike probably down as well. And I think that is one of the big problems. So how do we go about potentially fixing that? Well, I think we just take the dev's initial idea, but just push it a bit further when they tried to change this choke point, right? Where you just make it, again, this choke point maybe a bit smaller and just a bit longer as well. More similar to this B choke point, I think, where, you know, potentially it comes in with something like that instead. Don't take the drawings as like gospel, right? You know, obviously I'm just drawing kind of freehand here, but, you know, something like this I think would be worth it, because that would make it much harder for, you know, just a 5-stack execute A, let's just run it down the choke point. And I think that would then potentially lead people to going through the other areas towards A instead. But I do think that we need to make them a bit easier, because we don't want to upset the balance of attackers versus defenders either, which is pretty balanced on Breeze overall. So we do also need to consider how we might help the attackers. So let's start with this mid doors area, right? And I did say this can be a bit difficult to, you know, run up through the mid doors and come through this area. And so what I would try and do is basically open it up a bit. right? Make this a bit wider if we can, which means that, you know, certain mollies and things like that might not be as effective if we give the attackers more space. But also I'd like to just change this corner, because I think if we open up this corner as well, one of the big problems of coming through the mid doors is fixed, where when you run out through here, it's very difficult to know where to look, because they could be on your right, they could be on your left in a ton of different elevations, and so it's quite difficult to come out of here successfully, right? So by just changing this wall slightly, what you would do is mean that you could potentially isolate this right hand side first, check your right, and then be turning left. And at least then if you're turning left, yes, there will be different elevations to potentially deal with, but at least they're going to be on your left if you've checked your right. So that is kind of what I'm going for here, is to just make this a bit more viable for the attackers overall. The actual door here, the kind of big metal door, I would actually leave to be the same. I think it's I think it's the best gimmick probably in all of Valorant, to be honest. It's kind of the one that I enjoy most, is the opening of this door. But I would try and make this kind of wrap around the back a bit more viable. Now, you don't want this to be always happening, because then it would just be too hard to defend the map, I think, if you were just consistently coming in behind. But I do think I would like to make it a bit more viable. And I think the way you do that is to potentially just make this a bit smaller. Like this wall here, just close it off a bit so that defenders from like all the way back here can't quite see you cross, which is they can now. You know, potentially they need to be a bit closer to actually see you make this cross across there. That is what I would be trying to do, to again potentially just, you know, allow someone to have that idea that maybe they could do this just every so often. If you wanted to play a bit more risky, that you could go for that if you really wanted to. I think that that would be an interesting addition to potentially attacking the site. Obviously kind of a high risk, high reward. The problem is now it's kind of just a bit too high a risk. So hopefully with a change like this, you know, it would be somewhat viable. And now let's come to the B side of the map. And I think again, we see somewhat of some similar problems coming about, where again, certain areas of the map are just seen as a bit too out of bounds for the attackers to really try, whereas others are seen as just more viable. And again, it's ending up, I think, in a lot of just like 5-man pushes down B. We see that quite often overall. And so I would like, if we could, to try and again, curtail that, potentially get some kind of extra layers into these takes of B sites, again, just to make it a bit more interesting and more areas of the map be viable. So why do teams just, you know, send it down B with 4 or 5 players? Why is that kind of the meta on this map? Because this choke point isn't the easiest to get out of. It's fairly narrow, it's quite long, you have to watch both sides, so you know, it's not the easiest to actually get out of, which again is another reason why I think a lot of people do prefer the A site in general when they're attacking. But the big reason for me is because trying to come across here and make this mid split from B just doesn't quite get you enough value often. And the reason for that, I think, is because when you're trying to cross this, you can be seen from down here. And so when you're running up here, right, you're worried about what's going on in nest, you're worried about where you're going here in elbow, and someone could peek you from either of these two angles, different elevations, different angles. But then also a defender can just be down here and just kill you from behind. And I think that that is a big problem, that is just one too many things to worry about. It's on such a different angle to have to be worrying about that, right? And if you are worrying about it and you are facing down here, then, you know, someone just comes through nest and just kills you instead. You know, that's often how it feels, I think, when you try and do this kind of split towards B. And I think that that is a big frustration with this B site. So how do you fix that? Well, I think the most simple way of fixing that is just to extend this wall. You know, just make it so that, you know, someone down here can't see you easily. Or the other option would be to change this wall if you wanted as well. Bring this in a bit so that, again, someone down here maybe couldn't see you, but a defender might be pushed out here to be able to see you instead, which then means that they are taking a risk, right? I think that that's the big thing, that someone sitting right here now doesn't have to take a risk. They can stand pretty much right by the door and easily get away if they wanted to, whilst also potentially getting a free kill by seeing you cross across here. So I do think that that would be a good way of trying to solve this problem. But again, I don't want to upset the balance of this map overall, so what would I go about trying to help the defenders in this way? Well, I think I would try and help the defenders in a way that I think the devs I think initially wanted this to be the way that defenders played on Breeze. Obviously the rotates do take a long time on Breeze, so I think the advantage that they wanted for the defenders is that there's a lot of different flanking points, right? If we just draw them all, now this one obviously can only be done kind of by Omen or Jets or certain agents, but there are a lot of different options here for the flank, for the defenders to come down, right? There's just a ton of different things and different ways that you can draw these flanks, right? You can come down halls, there's 2 ways to come down A, and what this means is for the attackers is that it can be very, very difficult to try and put your Sentinel utility in the right place to stop a flank, and that is, I think, what initially the idea behind this map is that would be the defender's advantage. They would have a ton of different ways to potentially flank. And what I would do on this B site is just push people in that direction a little bit more by potentially adding or either changing where these boxes are to put them here so that you could potentially jump up this window as the defenders, and potentially, that becomes a more viable flanking option as well. And we might see some more aggressive defensive play on this B site, and there might be more interesting things to do, because when you're a defender now and you come into this area, you're kind of stuck, right? You might get a kill, but then you are really doomed, to be honest. It's kind of a one and done position, but adding these boxes makes it a much more viable position, right? And it kind of punishes the attackers if they don't take this early control of B. Then they might be in some trouble later on if you can sneak into this area or even jump into the window. I think it would add some interesting counterplay for the defenders on this B site as well. So these were just some of my ideas, and again, I am not a map designer, so I'm sure that potentially some of you in the comments have much better ideas of certain things of how to fix it, but these were just some of my ideas, and I would be interested in hearing some other people's ideas, or if you are like a map or level designer, what you think of some of these changes, and would they help for the better on Breeze, and just let me know in the comments down below, because I think that this map does have a lot of potential, but potentially some things are just, kind of ruining that or spoiling that in some ways, because of the way the map is currently being played out.